Good afternoon, YouTube. I'm on the Johnston farm and also the Indian Barrow, which is a historical farm in Piqua, Ohio. We're on the General Harrison Canal boat. Oh, he walks along during this whole time? That's interesting. That's.
Well, welcome to the General Harrison. We're glad you're along with us. We're going to be riding north on the canal here in just a minute. But I heard somebody trying to call my favorite farm animal a donkey. So that forces me to tell my favorite story. So I'll give you a clue about how you tell the difference between a donkey and a horse. So an old farmer getting ready to have a garden, and he's out with his tractor and he's plowing his garden, and his neighbor spies him. And so his neighbor comes down the road and says, "What you up to?" And the farmer says, "Well, I'm going to have a garden. I'm going to grow sweet corn in my garden." And the neighbor said, "That's great. I really like sweet corn. So when the sweet corn comes in, I'd like to buy some sweet corn from you." So he said, "That's great." And the neighbor says, "I'll pay you some money and I'll buy some sweet corn." And the farmer said, "There's one thing you have to understand. I'm going to try an experiment this year. I'm going to fertilize half the garden with mule manure and the other half with horse manure." And the neighbor said, "Well, it doesn't make me any difference. You use fertilizer either way. It's not a big deal." So sweet corn season comes in, the neighbor comes down the road to buy some sweet corn. He pays the farmer for the sweet corn, and he says to the farmer, "Gee, how did your experiment work out?" And the farmer thought for a second. He said, "You know, about the only thing I can tell, the side that I used for mule manure, the ears were a little longer." All right. So that's my favorite deal. In case you have any doubt, that's it.
I want my money back.
Yeah, that's right. That probably is deserved. Well, this is an actual section.
Interesting. You could see how the horses help pulling the canal boat.
And put down a center mark for the canal. And so once the center mark is laid, then we get ready for the first contract on this portion of the canal. First contract is put out for workers called cutters and grubbers. The cutters and grubbers are the workers. The cutters and grubbers are the workers who come out and they start to clear the land. Remember, when the cutters and grubbers start, this big piece of dirt where the animal is walking on today is not there. The terrain just goes right down to the river from here. It's about maybe 10 to 12 feet down to the river from the towpath at this point in time. So the cutters and grubbers come out and they're clearing a space probably 60 to 100 feet either side of the center line. The reason for that is that we want the diggers to have plenty of space to operate. But the second reason is that we want to make sure all the big trees are cleared away so that when the canal finally opens, we don't want trees blown into the canal from storms and things, because that would cause the maintenance crews to come out and it slows things down. So we're kind of big wide scar through this portion of Ohio. The second reason, of course, is the trees like water, and we're going to need all the water we can put together to make the canal work. So we're trying to get trees cut back. What you see now is probably second or third growth timber, and a lot of those have grown up since the giant flood of 1913. That's an ending story, and I'll come back to that in just a little while here. So once the cutters and grubbers get the land kind of cleared, we have these huge bonfires going with stumps and brush and all kinds of things going. And Ohio at the time is really cutting two big scars through Ohio. One on this part of the state, which we later called the Milan Canal, and then on the other part of the state we're making a similar canal, only that canal is called the Ohio Erie Canal. And that canal was designed to run from Cleveland to Portsmouth, Ohio. Both canals being developed at the same time. Plus some other offshoots of the canal. We'll talk about that a little bit later also. So once the cutters and grubbers get finished here, then the first contract is put out for the actual digging. The canal was bid on a mile-by-mile basis. And so if you were a farmer and maybe you're looking for work in the winter and you wanted to build a mile, you could contract for a mile, but you had to fulfill the engineer's design for that mile. So if you had a mile digging, that was it. If you had a mile that required a lock and maybe a bridge, then you had other things to bid into that. So bids were taken on a mile-by-mile basis. So the second group of workers come in to start the actual digging process. Interesting kind of a sub-note here, most of the workers who dig the canal in Ohio, the canals in Ohio, are really German and Irish immigrants. And the reason is that the Germans had made one of the first major pushes of immigration coming to the United States. Many of them are trying to escape the 100 Years' War that's going on in Europe. And so they're trying to escape conscription and political freedom and those kinds of things. They're coming to the United States hoping to gain those kind of things. So with that, the Germans have made their first wave, and some of them have actually made it as far west as Cincinnati. Remember, this is still considered to be, we're a state at this point, but it's still part of the frontier. And so because of that, it's unusual that immigrant groups have made it that far west, but many of the Germans did. The Irish, on the other hand, are coming to America because of the Irish potato famines. If you've ever seen a program on TV, there's an interesting, I think it's a PBS program called The Irish in America. If you've not seen that, you ought to watch it. It talks about potato famines and what goes on in Ireland, what motivates people to leave their home country and come out to America. So the Irish are primarily located in the large East Coast seaports, Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, and Philadelphia, that kind of thing. And so Ohio actually has to go out to those places to advertise because we're so desperate to have workers to work on the canal. At one point in time, we were so desperate that we actually advertised for workers in Dublin, Ireland, because we knew people were coming and we're saying, come to America, we've got work for you to do in America. What we didn't tell them, of course, was that we were going to pay them 30 cents a day and give them a jigger of whiskey every night to kill disease. So it's a little bit different on that part of the story, I think so. But the German and Irish immigration story comes back several times, and again, I'll drop back if we have time and tell you a little more about what's going on between those two groups, who, by the way, don't like each other very much. And so it's an interesting immigration story. Something you've probably heard in your news on occasion. We have immigration issues in our generation, and they had them back then as well. So the workers come in the fall of 1836, and they start to dig the canal, and they start to shape the canal. The towpath has to be created. The towpath is really the only thing that keeps the water in the ditch from going into the Great Miami River. And so up on top of the towpath, the engineer calls for 10 foot of passage. That's where the animals walk. It's called towpath because it's T-O-W, to tow the boat. It's not your toe, it's the tow the boat. And so the engineer calls for 10 foot of passage because eventually we're going to have two sets of animals, one set going north and one set going south. And so we need to have sufficient space for them to operate. The second dimension that we're implementing is we're trying to implement, at a minimum, 40 foot of water clearance. And the reason is that two boats are going to pass. And so again, in this part of Ohio, one boat going south, one boat going north, and because of that, you have to have enough space so that the two boats won't collide in the process of going through there. At least they're not supposed to. How's that? I'm about 6 foot tall, just a little over 6 foot. So that's 6 foot of the boat right there. This boat's about 13 foot from gunwale to gunwale, and it's about 70 feet long. Now, when we get up to the ending part of this trip and turn the boat around, you'll see lot number 8, and you'll get a pretty clear visual of why the boat can't be much larger than that. This is probably the largest boat from width and length that could operate on the canal, because the locks in Ohio really control the length and width of the boat. So the workers come in, they begin implementing the engineer's statistics. By the way, I forgot the third and final. The third and final dimension actually is the depth of the canal, and in the center of the canal, a 26-foot cup is cut, and that's where the dimension was taken, and at a minimum we wanted 4 foot of water in the ditch. So big heavy boats can operate if they're careful with 4 foot of water. We have this terrific idea for a canal in New York. Can you please help us fund it? And after getting turned down 4 times, they finally got the end. And they weren't going to get any money for that. And so they decided to go ahead and implement the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was done from 1817 to 1825, and then we started in Ohio in 1825. We're just a little bit behind in that. The Erie Canal was the first canal built west of the Alleghenies, and because of that, there was not a real deep pool of engineers. My understanding was when the Erie Canal starts, we have about 1 civil engineer per state.
Wow.
So we don't have a very deep labor pool, in terms of engineers. So some of the people who actually came to help with the work on the canal came from England, because England and Europe had a lot more experience with canals than we did in that time frame. And so they're teaching engineers and people who want to learn how to build canals, they're teaching them how to do that. And at the same time, then these workers go off and are able to help other states build canals as well. So some of the workers on this canal, as well as some of the engineers, had actually helped with the building of the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal finishes up in 1825, and that's really the kickoff point for us in Ohio, is 1825. Remember that Ohio is only, 23 years old at that point. And we're digging 2 major canals, and that puts us in debt right up in the eyebrows. A lot of concern for cost. If you remember what Ohio was like at statehood, if you remember your Ohio history when you were paying attention in the 7th grade or something like that, Ohio, a very poorly populated state. We had to meet the minimum to be able to become a state, and the minimum, this is the language of the Northwest Treaty Ordinance, not my language. The Northwest Treaty Ordinance says to become a state you have to have 60,000 white male landowners. Okay,
60,000?
Politically correct in our generation, but that was the term. And so we're assuming that meant roughly 60,000 families were living in Ohio at the time of statehood. Remember that when Ohio becomes a state, there's only 16 counties in Ohio. Right now we have 88. Some of the counties in 1803 ran all the way from the Ohio River clear to Lake Erie.
Wow.
Okay, they've been subdivided and chopped up and all kinds of things. We had large spaces of land that really were considered federal land because nobody had really claimed them. And so we have counties starting to form in the south and the northeast, but not very well populated, not very well organized. And also remember there were 12 active Indian tribes still living in Ohio when Ohio becomes a state. So it's an interesting kind of place. This really is, we're kind of moving out of the frontier and moving into statehood, but it's not easy. And of course the other thing that you need to remember is that the roads in Ohio are terrible and the rivers are not navigable for big boats like this. And so canals get talked about real early on in Ohio history. But we finally get the push to build canals in 1825. And the reason for that, of course, was the opening of the Erie Canal. With the Erie Canal opening up, a lot of things are starting to flow out of all the Great Lakes, and they're coming to Lake Erie. And Ohio's fear is they're all going to go right across Lake Erie to Buffalo, New York, get on the Erie Canal and go across to New York and not come through Ohio. So Ohio wants to have traffic come through. We want to accomplish 2 basic goals. We want to see if we can't grow the state population-wise, and we want to see if we can't start to increase the economy. And by doing that, you help the people who are living there to get more money. Most of them are farmers, and they're not doing very well. And so we think that by having a canal, we can get farm produce out to larger markets for profit, and we also think that people will get encouraged about coming into Ohio to settle, and that'll help the state grow. So those are the 2 fundamental goals that we implement. Ohio actually digs canals from 1825, the starting point, on both sides of the state, until 1848. And that's the last year we actually dig a mile of canal in Ohio. And when we finish, Ohio has hand dug over 1,000 miles of ditch just in Ohio. I can name some canals that most of you, I had one person on the boat in the 4 years has ever known the one canal that I named, so have to be careful. Anybody ever heard of the Lahooning Canal?
What canal?
Lahooning.
Wouldn't know.
It comes out of Knox County and goes to Coshocton. How about the Sandy and Beaver? How about the Mahoning Valley Canal? How about the Lebanon Extension? Anybody ever been to Trader's World down on 75?
Yeah.
That was a canal that came from Hamilton to Lebanon. That was 63 before it was a road, it was a canal. We have an extension here that goes from Lockington up to Sidney and Shelby County and up to Fort Jefferson. So that was a canal. How about the Milan Canal? Anybody know where Milan, Ohio is, up in north central Ohio? During the 1840s, there was about a 10-mile canal that came back from Lake Erie to the town of Milan. And in 4 years, in 1840, the town of Milan was the largest shipper of grain in any port in the world. Wow. Okay. Because all this grain is coming out of Ohio, being put on canal boats. It goes out to Lake Erie, and we put it on seagoing vessels that take it across Lake Erie to Buffalo, get back on another canal boat, and head to New York that way. So interesting kind of things are happening in Ohio with the building of the canal. This canal is fundamentally built in 3 sections. You're riding in really kind of the extension of the first section. The first section was called the Miami Canal. It ran basically from Dayton to Cincinnati. It's about 63 miles of the canal. It takes about 4 years to get that all dug and in place. The reason that's selected is that we've had a lot of people move from Kentucky into Ohio and settle in that part of southwestern Ohio. So the Canal Commission bet that a lot of people would have farms, they would be using the canal. A lot of revenue could turn over pretty quickly, and that would help the canal be built. So by 1829, the canal was opened from Cincinnati on the Ohio River down to up to Dayton. And then we have a little something that happens. Now kids don't get this, but adults get it real quickly. Who would think that when you have a big project in Ohio, you have lots of money on the line, you have thousands of workers around digging, who would think that politics might get involved in something like that? Who would figure? Politics get involved in 1829, and the canal cut does not move forward in its building north out of Montgomery County until we have a local politician who kind of stirs the old political pot a little bit and helps the politics change slightly, and we start to get the canal moving out of Montgomery County. Of course, the local politician is John Johnston. Johnston is a very big advocate for this part of Ohio and really wants to see the canal come up in this area because he knows what will happen to the area, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get an opportunity. So Johnston is able to kind of stir the pot. The canal starts to be moving north out of Dayton into upper parts of Montgomery County in 1832, and as I mentioned, this section really gets developed in the middle 1830s and opens up. By the way, the opening ceremony for this canal was held July the 4th of 1837. It's a big event. The canal has been started to be used, but the county people wanted to see a big activity happen. And so they look around for a little while and they're trying to think about, gee, who could we bring that would really bring the status to the canal and really say nice things about all the people who have worked on the canal. They don't have to think too long because we have somebody who's in retirement living in North Bend. Anybody know where North Bend is on the Ohio River? Down almost exactly on the river. It's real close to where Indiana and Ohio come together. And of course the person we're talking about is William Henry Harrison. Harrison's in retirement his wife is trying to keep him in retirement. If you remember your American history, it doesn't last very long. But Harrison is the featured invited guest that gets invited. He comes up the canal, stops at all of the locations in Milan County to say nice things. And he and Johnston were friends for a long time. We think they meet the first time in about 1792. But in 1837, when Harrison comes up the canal, he stops to see all of his friends, including the Johnstons, that he knew very well. And he and Johnston share a couple things in common. Number one, they were both very conservatives in their political life, and so we called them Whigs, W-H-I-G-G-S. I think the Whigs kind of changed a little bit and eventually become Republicans at one point in the 1840s or maybe the 1850s. But the other thing that Johnston and Harrison shared in common is they're both good failures. And so when Harrison comes to Milan County to deliver his remarks, he doesn't stop at city buildings or county buildings. He stops at the Episcopal churches and he delivers his remarks from the steps of the Episcopal churches, so we know where those spots are. We have them all marked and things. So kind of interesting side note to what's going on in that part of history. So this part of the canal opens up by 1837, and you could have used it all the way to Cincinnati. Remember, it's all downhill from here to Cincinnati. So roughly 85 miles down to the wharf on the Ohio River. So this part of the canal first built. Second part of the canal built in northwestern Ohio. It runs from Paulding County, which is about 5 or 6 counties north of us here, and it runs up to Defiance, following the Auglaize River, and then the Auglaize River dumps into the large Maumee River, and the northern and western bank of the Maumee was the path down to Lake Erie from there. So that section built second. Some interesting stories with that. We have a moment here. I'll jump into those. The last part of the canal really closes those two sections together, and that is finally completed in 1845. So by roughly 20 years in the building to get this canal in place, and we have a little downtime for some good old-fashioned Ohio politicking, and then we have a little downtime because in 1837 we had a national depression, and a lot of banks back east were failing. And it's pretty hard to raise money when banks are failing. We kind of know what that's been like in the last couple of years. We understand what happens when institutions start to fail and things don't go right. Ohio is fundamentally using two steps in trying to fund the building of the canal. One is we're trying to sell unused land in Ohio. We call it federal land. The second thing was we were trying to sell bonds. And when banks are failing, you can't sell bonds. It's not a good time to do that. So the canal opens up by 1845. We're going to come into the northern turnaround basin. This is the basin that was built in 1837 for boats to turn around and head back into Piqua from here. We'll talk about what goes on here at the basin. Also, we're going to show you lot number 8 south. Remember I talked about the width and the length of the boat, and you'll get a pretty good look at why you can't have a boat.
Is that where we turn around it?
We're going to turn around right in here.
Lot number 8.
Now you can actually see it better from out here, but you can...
Right here.
I need to get up by you real quick,
okay.
Please. Then I'm down here. There we go.
Lock number 8. That's interesting.
This is 8 south.
8 south. Man. This is where we turn around it.
Watch your head.
Okay. I'll start a new one since we're going to begin the trip back, what, north again or south?
We're going south now. We're going to turn
Okay.
around, and this is as far north as we can go, and then we're going to go south.
This is what, Lock 8 you said?
This is 8 south.
Lock 8 south, okay. Alright YouTube, this is Lock 8 south on the Miami-Erie Canal. Is there a trail that you can access this, or is it?
Well, the towpath accesses it, but it's not supposed to be for public use. Here comes the rope.
Okay.
I need to get